The icy wind on the Great Plains cuts through the skin like a sharp knife, leaving no chance for error for an unprotected person. A blizzard in these parts can cover the entire world with an impenetrable white veil in a matter of minutes, erasing the horizon and any landmarks. In such extreme conditions, the only thing standing between fragile human life and certain death is a properly constructed shelter. The engineering solutions of the indigenous peoples of North America were not just architecture, but the result of centuries of dialogue with the harsh natural environment. Their dwellings withstood storms that easily broke centuries-old trees and retained heat even in the most severe frosts. Watch the video to the end to learn how engineers of the past created a ventilation system that worked better than modern ones and why snow became the main insulator for walls. What if I told you that everything you believed about the strength of walls is not true? We are used to thinking that protection from a hurricane means thick stone blocks and deep foundations, but the nomadic peoples of the plains proved the opposite. Their secret was not in resisting the wind, but in the ability to let it pass by without creating excessive pressure on the structure. The conical shape of the teepee was chosen not by chance and not for aesthetic reasons, but because of its ideal aerodynamics. Wind of any strength flows smoothly around the sloping walls, pressing the dwelling to the ground instead of overturning it. The frame was assembled from long poles, most often made of pine, which is renowned for its flexibility and strength. These poles were not installed randomly, but in a strict order, forming a rigid and elastic cone. At the intersection at the top, they were tied together so that any load was distributed evenly throughout the structure. If the wind pressed on one side, the force was transferred to all the other supports, making the structure monolithic. This system allowed the shelter to withstand gusts that could destroy the rigid wooden structures of Europeans. Particular attention was paid to the angle of the rear wall of the dwelling, which was always steeper than the front. This was done in order to most effectively withstand the prevailing winds blowing from the west. The more vertical rear part better withstood the pressure of the air and provided additional stability to the entire structure. The front part was more sloping, which increased the interior space and stability of the entrance area. Native American craftsmen understood the laws of physics on an intuitive level, passing this knowledge down from generation to generation. The covering of sewn bison hides was stretched over the frame with incredible force, turning it into a tight drum. It was important that there were no gaps between the covering and the ground where icy air could blow in. The lower edge of the skin was often weighed down with heavy stones or even covered with earth for complete airtightness. In dry weather, the skin was stretched tighter, and in wet weather, it sagged slightly, so the tension had to be adjusted daily. This required constant attention and a deep understanding of the properties of the material. Unlike stationary houses, the teepee was a living organism that breathed and moved with the wind. The flexibility of the pine poles allowed the structure to deform slightly under the blows of the storm, but not to break. This elasticity was the main guarantee of survival in the open steppe, where the wind had nowhere to catch hold. A rigid wall will crack sooner or later, while a flexible structure will simply spring back and return to its original position. It was this principle that later formed the basis for the earthquake-resistant construction of skyscrapers. However, the shape itself is only half the battle because it was necessary to preserve precious heat inside. Simply stretching a skin over sticks is not enough to survive a night at -40 degrees. Multi-layering played a huge role, which we will discuss a little later, but now it is important to understand the outer contour. The outer shell served as the first barrier, taking the brunt of the elements and precipitation. It had to be completely waterproof and windproof. Setting up the poles required the coordinated work of several people and took surprisingly little time. First, 3 or 4 support poles were erected to form the base of the pyramid. Then the rest were added to them, creating a dense palisade on which the heavy cover was placed. Smoke vents were left at the top, which also played a role in controlling airflow. Every element of this structure had been refined over centuries and had no unnecessary parts. Interestingly, winter dwellings were often lower than summer ones to reduce wind resistance. Their compactness made it easier to heat the room and keep the heat inside the living space. Large ceremonial teepees were rarely used in winter or were reinforced with additional struts. Practicality and resource conservation always came first in matters of winter survival. Any mistake in calculating the height could cost the tribe dearly. During snowstorms, snowdrifts accumulated around the base of the teepee, which were not removed but used as an additional engineering feature. The snow was compacted to create an external windbreak that deflected cold air currents upward. This natural insulation worked perfectly, closing any possible gaps at the bottom edge. Thus, the very elements that threatened life became part of the dwelling's protective system. Nature was not an enemy, but a harsh partner. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about how much modern architects could learn from ancient builders about the use of aerodynamics? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next reviews. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the choice of location could save or destroy an entire tribe? The construction of a winter camp began long before the first stake was driven or the first pole was cut. Experienced scouts and elders spent weeks studying the terrain, choosing the perfect spot for wintering. They were looking not just for a flat area, but for a complex combination of natural factors that would guarantee safety. A mistake in choosing a location meant that even the most perfect dwelling would not save them from the piercing wind. In winter, the plain turns into a wind tunnel, where the wind accelerates to monstrous speeds. Therefore, camps were never set up on open hills or in the middle of the bare steppe. Deep river valleys protected by high banks or rocky outcrops were considered the ideal location. The walls of the canyon or the steep banks of the river created a natural barrier that broke up the airflow. In such wind shadows, the wind speed could be several times lower than at the top. The presence of natural vegetation, especially dense shrubs or forests, was of great importance. Trees not only provided fuel for fires, but also served as a living shield against snowdrifts. The camp was set up so that a strip of forest was between the dwellings and the prevailing wind. The trees took the brunt of the elements, trapping snow and reducing the force of gusts. This was the first line of defense, created by nature itself and skillfully used by humans. It was also important to consider how the sun illuminated the chosen site during the short winter days. Preference was given to places facing south or southeast in order to receive maximum solar heat. The morning sun would help warm the camp faster after a freezing night and dry, wet clothes. Shady northern slopes, where the snow did not melt for months, were avoided at all costs. Solar energy was a passive but important source of heat. Proximity to water was critically important, but required caution and careful calculation. It was necessary to be close enough to the source so as not to waste a lot of energy transporting water or ice. However, it was dangerous to build dwellings right at the water's edge due to the possibility of spring floods or dampness. Therefore, terraces were chosen, flat areas slightly above the river level but below the main level of the plain. This provided a balance between resource availability and safety. Particular attention was paid to how snow fell in a given area under different winds. By observing old snowdrifts in the shape of trees, it was possible to predict where drifts would form. No one wanted to wake up in the morning and find their home completely buried under a meter-thick layer of snow. Camps were set up where the wind blew the snow away, leaving the areas relatively clear. This knowledge was passed down through the observations and experiences of many generations. The structure of the soil was also taken into account, as it was impossible to drive stakes into frozen rock. They looked for places with soil that was soft enough but dense enough to hold the fastenings well. They often used old campsites where the ground was already compacted and familiar. The soil had to provide reliable drainage so that water would not flood the floor during thaws. A dry floor was the basis of a warm dwelling. In the wooded areas of the Northeast, the choice of location was linked to the availability of certain tree species. Birch provided bark for covering wigwams, and coniferous branches served as excellent insulation for the floor. Builders looked for places where these resources were within walking distance so as not to waste extra energy. The forest was not just a shelter, it was a warehouse of building materials. Every stump and every fallen tree was evaluated in terms of its usefulness. The ability to read the landscape was akin to reading a complex book written in the language of relief and wind. It was a real science, taking into account dozens of variables, from wind direction to animal behavior. People did not try to remake the landscape to suit themselves. They integrated into it as organically as possible. This strategy allowed them to save energy and resources, which were worth their weight in gold in winter. Harmony with the place was the key to the tribe surviving the long winter without losses. A well-chosen location worked for the people, protecting them from the worst weather conditions. Ignoring the signs of the earth has always led to tragedy. How important do you think it is today to take the natural landscape into account when building houses? In the next chapter, you will learn what secret technology tribes use to create a thermos effect inside their dwellings. Want to learn a secret that will change your perception of warmth? The outer shell of a teepee or wigwam was only the first line of defense, but the real magic of warmth happened inside. The main technological breakthrough of the plane's engineers was the use of an inner liner, often referred to as dew cloth or ozone. This design element transformed a simple shelter into a high-tech thermos, capable of maintaining a comfortable temperature even in severe frosts. Without this invention, survival in the winter steppe would have been virtually impossible. The inner lining was a strip of sewn skins or thick fabric about 1.5 to 2 meters high. It was attached to the poles of the frame inside the dwelling, starting from the ground and running around the entire perimeter. The most important thing was that it did not fit tightly to the outer covering. There was an air gap several centimeters wide between the outer layer and the inner, dewy fabric. This layer of air acted as a powerful insulator, blocking out the cold. The principle of this system was ingenious in its simplicity and physical soundness. Cold air that penetrated under the outer edge of the teepee did not immediately enter the living area. It was trapped in the space between the two layers of skins and heated up as it rose. This created a thermal curtain that protected the inhabitants from drafts and the icy breath of the earth. The living space was enclosed in a capsule of warm air. The dewy fabric performed another critically important function, controlling humidity and condensation. In severe frost, the heat from breathing and the hearth rose and settled on the cold outer walls in the form of frost or dew. If there had been no inner layer, drops of cold water would have dripped directly onto the sleeping areas and people. The insert caught this moisture, directing it down the walls or allowing it to evaporate without reaching the living area. The height of this inner screen was calculated to protect sleeping people from drafts. When a person sat or lay on the skins, they were below the upper edge of the dew fabric, in the zone of maximum comfort. Cold air, if it seeped in, passed above their heads and went straight into the smoke hole. This created a stable microclimate in the lower part of the dwelling, where all life took place. The material for this insert was chosen with particular care, often softer and thinner than the outer covering. It was often decorated with drawings depicting the owner's exploits or family history. This made it not only a utilitarian item, but also an important element of the interior, creating a cozy atmosphere. Visually, this reduced the space, but made it more intimate and psychologically warm. In winter, the space between the insert and the outer wall was often filled with dry grass or hay. This turned the air gap into a full-fledged insulated wall, similar to modern frame houses. A layer of dry grass 20 to 30 centimeters thick created an insurmountable barrier to the cold. This design allowed the interior to remain above freezing even without constantly maintaining a large fire. Installing and adjusting the ozone required skill, as any gaps would negate its effectiveness. The edges were carefully tucked under the floor covering to prevent air from blowing in from below. The upper edge was stretched over a special cord tied to the frame poles. The entire system was collapsible and mobile, which was in keeping with the nomadic lifestyle. This multi-layered technology is the direct ancestor of modern tourist tents, with an awning and an inner bedroom. The North American Indians came to this solution empirically, by observing nature and experimenting. They realized that air is the best insulator if it is properly packed. It was this knowledge that allowed them to sleep without clothes under warm blankets when a blizzard was raging outside. The effectiveness of the dewy fabric was so high that even a small flame could heat a large space. This saved firewood, which was difficult to obtain from under the snow in winter. If you appreciate the genius of this simple solution, like this video. What if I showed you a time machine that would take us back to the origins of climate control? The central element of any winter dwelling was the hearth, but lighting a fire inside a flammable structure is no easy task. The main problem was not so much the heat as the smoke, which could quickly make it impossible to stay inside. Native American builders developed a complex system of valves and drafts that worked like a powerful exhaust fan. This allowed them to maintain clean air, even when the hearth was burning intensely. At the top of the teepee were two movable valves controlled by long poles standing outside. These valves could be turned and opened at the desired angle, depending on the direction of the wind. If the wind blew from the north, the valves were set to close the opening on the windward side and open it on the leeward side. This created a low-pressure zone above the top, which literally sucked the smoke out of the dwelling. Controlling these smoke valves was an art that was learned from childhood. It was necessary to feel the slightest changes in the wind and rearrange the poles in time so that the smoke did not go inside. At night, when the wind could change, someone would wake up to adjust the position of the flaps. It was a continuous watch, ensuring safety and comfort for all inhabitants. The hearth was not located strictly in the center, but slightly closer to the entrance under the smoke vent. For better combustion and heat reflection, a stone or wooden screen was often placed behind the hearth. The stones heated up and continued to give off gentle heat long after the fire had burned out. This thermal inertia helped to smooth out temperature fluctuations at night. The supply of fresh air to the hearth played an important role in maintaining combustion. Air was taken in from outside through special channels or seeped in through the entrance. Cold air flows went along the bottom, fed the flames, and, heating up, went up along with the smoke. This constant circulation provided ventilation for the room, removing carbon dioxide. In winter, special types of wood were used that gave off a lot of heat but little smoke and sparks. Poplar and willow, which often grow along rivers, were used for quick fires, while hardwoods were saved for long nights. A supply of dry firewood was stored inside the dwelling near the entrance, so that it would always remain dry and ready for use. Wet firewood could fill the entire room with smoke in a matter of minutes. During heavy storms, when it was impossible to open the vents due to snow, hot coals were used. The fire was lit outside or in a special place, and the already burnt but hot coals were brought inside. They provided the necessary heat without acrid smoke, allowing people to wait out the bad weather with the vents closed. This required caution, but it was an effective way to survive. To cook food in winter, they often used hot stones, which they threw into containers of water. This allowed them to cook food without an open fire and excess steam inside a closed room. This method of cooking also served as an additional source of moist heat. In the dry, frosty air, a little moisture was beneficial for breathing. The ventilation system in Tipis and wigwams was so sophisticated that it surpassed many European homes of the time. While log cabins were often stuffy and smoky, the air in a properly configured teepee remained fresh. It was a triumph of aerodynamics over primitive heating. Knowledge of the properties of fire and air made it possible to create comfort even in the middle of an icy desert. Have you ever thought about how difficult it was to keep a fire going without matches or lighters in such conditions? In the next chapter, we will look at a completely different type of dwelling, where the main material was the earth itself. The peoples who lived permanently in forest areas and on the edges of plains had a radically different approach to winter construction. They relied not on mobility and aerodynamics, but on mass, wall thickness, and the thermal insulation properties of the earth. The earthen houses of the Mandan and Hidatsa peoples were massive dome-shaped structures, half buried in the ground. The heavy log frame was covered with a thick layer of turf and earth, creating a cellar effect. The thick layer of earth on the roof and walls served as ideal insulation, smoothing out temperature fluctuations. The earth froze slowly, and even in the most severe frosts, the temperature inside remained above freezing. In summer, such houses were cool, and in winter, the walls retained the heat accumulated during the day. It was true passive energy-saving architecture, using the geothermal properties of the planet. The entrance to an earth house was a long covered corridor that served as a vestibule. It blocked out the cold air and prevented the main living area from cooling down when the door was opened. Often, the entrance was covered with a heavy bison hide, which acted as an airtight door. Firewood or tools could also be stored inside the corridor, creating an additional buffer. The longhouses of the Iroquois in the Northeast were built on a different principle, but with the same purpose: to retain heat. These were huge frame structures covered with thick layers of elm bark or other trees. The bark was laid overlapping, like tiles, and pressed down with external frames to prevent it from being blown off by the wind. This multi-layered cladding provided reliable protection from wind and precipitation. There were no partitions inside the longhouse, but the space was divided into zones by a series of hearths located along the central axis. Several related families could live in one such house, warming each other with their body heat. Collective living was an important factor for survival, as a large number of people generated a lot of heat. It was easier to maintain the fire and prepare fuel through joint efforts. The roof of a longhouse was arched, which prevented large amounts of snow from accumulating. The snow either slid off on its own or could be easily swept off without climbing up. This was important because wet snow could break even the strongest beams with its weight. Forest engineers knew the strength limits of their materials. The floor in such permanent dwellings was often raised above the ground, with flooring made of branches and skins. This created an air gap and protected against dampness and cold coming from the ground. Along the walls, sleeping platforms were arranged, which were also located on a raised platform. The warmest place was always half a meter to a meter above the floor. The space under the roof was used for drying and storing food supplies, corn, dried meat, and herbs. These supplies, hung under the arches, created an additional layer that retained heat. Smoke from the hearths preserved food and repelled pests. The entire house functioned as a single mechanism for sustaining life. Unlike tipis, such houses were built to last for many years, with constant repairs and renovations. This required a lot of labor at the initial stage, but it paid off in terms of reliability and comfort. Residents could survive the harshest winter with everything they needed at hand. These monumental structures prove that indigenous peoples possessed a variety of construction technologies. They chose the type of housing that best suited their specific climate and lifestyle. Are you ready for the shocking truth about where the deadly cold really comes from? We are used to thinking that cold penetrates through walls or cracks in windows, but for a person sleeping on the ground, the main enemy was the soil. The earth is an endless heat absorber, capable of draining life from the body in a single night, even if the air around it is warm. Native American builders paid no less attention to floor insulation than to walls and roofs. The battle for warmth began at the bottom, at the very foundation of the shelter. The first layer of insulation was always the earth itself, which was carefully prepared. Snow and ice were removed from the site, and the soil was dried by building fires on the site of the future dwelling. After the ground had warmed up and dried out, it was compacted to create a dense and level base. In some cases, the floor was slightly deepened to create an earthen rim around the perimeter. The main material used to insulate the floor was branches from coniferous trees, most often spruce or fir. They were laid in a thick layer like tiles, so that the sharp ends were directed downwards or toward the walls. The result was a springy, soft, and warm mat, 10 to 15 centimeters thick. Pine needles contain a lot of air, which is an excellent heat insulator. Woven mats made of reeds or willow twigs were laid on top of the fir branches. These mats created a flat surface and prevented people from sinking through the branches. Reeds have a hollow structure, which added another layer of air insulation. Such mats were light and could be rolled up and transported during migration. The final layer consisted of bison, bear, or deer skins laid fur side up. Thick winter fur provided unmatched thermal insulation, retaining body heat. The skins were laid overlapping so that there were no gaps through which the cold could penetrate. The sleeping area was transformed into a multi-layered sandwich that reliably separated a person from the frozen ground. Particular attention was paid to the edges of the floor where it touched the walls of the dwelling. Here, the insulation was laid with an overlap on the walls, creating a sealed bowl. The inner lining, ozon, was tucked under the floor covering, completely eliminating drafts from below. It was a closed system where each element had its place. In forest areas, tree bark laid in several layers was often used for flooring. The bark did not rot as quickly as grass and provided good protection against moisture. If the floor began to get damp, the covering was replaced or dried by the fire. Dryness was synonymous with warmth. Special structures made of willow rods, resembling low chairs with backrests, were also used for sitting and sleeping. The backrests were covered with skins, protecting the sitter from drafts from behind. The furniture was integrated into the insulation system. Such a multi-layered floor not only retained heat but also ensured hygiene. Branches and skins could be shaken out or replaced, getting rid of debris and insects. The scent of pine needles served as a natural deodorant in a confined space. The floor insulation system was the foundation of survival, invisible but critically important. It allowed people to sleep peacefully without fear of waking up with frostbite. What modern material do you think can match the effectiveness of such a natural pie? In the next chapter, we will learn how builders protected the most vulnerable part of any house, the front door. The entrance to any winter shelter was its Achilles heel, the most vulnerable point for cold to penetrate. A conventional hinged door was impossible in the soft construction of a teepee or wigwam, so engineers came up with other solutions. The entrance was always oriented to the east, toward the rising sun, and more importantly, away from the prevailing westerly winds. This location ensured that the wind would not blow directly into the dwelling, carrying away the heat. The door was not just a piece of skin, but a complex system of flaps. The doorway was oval in shape and located high enough off the ground so that snow would not immediately cover it. The threshold was made high so that people had to step over it, and the cold air creeping along the ground was kept outside. The door itself was often made of untreated stiff skin stretched over a frame of willow rods. This stiff panel fit tightly against the opening from the inside or outside, secured with special ties. The wool on the door skin was left on, turned inward for better insulation. A double door system was often used, creating a kind of vestibule or airlock. One curtain hung on the outside and the second on the inside, half a meter apart. The air between them served as a buffer, softening the temperature shock when entering and exiting. A person would pull back the first skin, enter the space between the doors, and only then open the second one. To weigh down the lower part of the door curtain, pieces of wood or stones were sewn to it. This ensured that the door closed automatically under its own weight. As soon as a person entered, the heavy skin immediately fell into place, pressing tightly against the edges of the opening. No springs or closers, just gravity. In winter, the entrance was often made smaller than in summer to minimize heat loss. Sometimes you had to literally crawl inside or bend over a lot. This inconvenience was the price to pay for keeping precious calories of heat inside the dwelling. In earthen houses and longhouses, the entrance was protected by long corridors covered with skins or bark. These tunnels dampened gusts of wind and allowed people to shake the snow off their clothes before entering the living area. Snow that was brought inside melted and created dampness, so it was carefully removed with special beaters made of bone or horn. In extreme cold, the entrance could be additionally covered with woolen blankets obtained through trade. Thick wool retained heat well and did not freeze from breath as much as leather. The combination of traditional and new materials increased the effectiveness of protection. Windbreaks made of branches or snow blocks were often built around the entrance from the outside. This created a calm area right in front of the door, making it easier to enter and exit during a storm. Such small details significantly increased the comfort of everyday life. The entrance area was a complex engineering unit that required constant care and repair. The temperature throughout the dwelling depended on its tightness, and every member of the tribe knew how to use this airlock correctly. The strength and protective properties of dwellings depended directly on the materials from which they were made. The main building material for the Plains tribes was bison hide. It was a unique material, strong, windproof, and durable when properly treated. To make a covering for one medium-sized teepee, 12 to 18 adult animal hides were required. The process of tanning the hides was laborious and required great skill on the part of the women of the tribe. The hides were cleaned of fat and meat and then treated with a mixture of animal brains and liver, which made the skin soft and elastic. After that, they were smoked over a smoky fire, which gave the skin water-repellent properties. Smoked leather did not stiffen after getting wet and drying, remaining soft even in the cold. Sewing the skins into a single sheet was a real engineering feat. They used animal tendons, which swelled when wet, tightly sealing the needle holes. The seam was completely waterproof and windproof. The shape of the patterns was complex so that the cover would fit perfectly on the cone of the frame without wrinkles. In forested areas, the main material was tree bark, especially birch bark. Birch bark has unique properties. It is strong, flexible, does not rot, and is completely waterproof due to its tar content. Large pieces of bark were removed from trees, steamed, and straightened under a press. They were sewn together with spruce roots to create light and durable panels for covering wigwams. Specific types of wood were chosen for the frames. Pine trees on the plains were valued for their straight trunks, while flexible willow or durable maple was used in the forests. The poles were carefully skinned and dried so that they would not rot or damage the covering. A good set of poles could serve a family for years and was transported from place to place as a great treasure. Insulation materials were also a gift of nature. Sphagnum moss, dry grass, and cattail fluff were all used to fill gaps and provide insulation. Moss, dried in a special way, worked like modern mineral wool, trapping air and absorbing excess moisture. Ropes and fasteners were made from rawhide or plant fibers, such as nettles or linden. Rawhide shrunk as it dried, tightening knots with incredible force. A structure tied with rawhide became monolithic after drying, as if welded from metal. The use of snow as a building material was characteristic of northern tribes. Dense, compacted snow was cut into blocks and used to cover the outside of dwellings. Snow consists of ice crystals and air, which makes it an excellent thermal insulator, contrary to its apparent coldness. All materials were renewable and biodegradable. When a dwelling became unusable, it simply returned to the earth, leaving no waste behind. It was a complete cycle of architecture, in perfect balance with the ecosystem. A deep understanding of the properties of natural materials made it possible to create reliable shelters without the use of metal or plastic. Every element, from thick hides to thin tendons, performed its function 100%. When a dark, leaden wall of clouds rose on the horizon, the camp instantly came to life, as if alarming news had entered the body. Women, men, teenagers, everyone knew that every second before the storm hit was worth its weight in gold. The sky changed color, the wind began to twitch like a beast on a leash, and that was the sign. It was time to act. The first thing they did was inspect and tighten every tension rod and every knot in the rope. The main anchor rope, converging from the top of the teepee, was pulled until the fibers squeaked dry. It was secured to a heavy, thick stake driven deep into the ground, often the same one that had been used for years, tested by dozens of storms. The men leaned toward the ground, listening to how it responded with vibrations, whether it held the stake firmly. It was almost a ritual, a real conversation between man and earth. Outside, the teepees were turned into fortified citadels. Heavy logs, flat stones, overturned sleds with their loads, anything that could keep the skin from being torn by the wind, were pressed against the lower edge of the tires. Sometimes the snow was so loose and deep that a high, dense embankment was built around the base. Such a snowbank deflected the wind and weakened its force. People knew that nature could be relentless, but it could be used to their advantage if they understood its nature. Inside the dwelling, their own chores began. They brought in supplies, bundles of dried meat, bags of fat, hard bread made from crushed corn, water or ice for melting, and armfuls of dry firewood. Everything that could be carried away by the wind or covered by snow was brought inside. The dwelling seemed to gather its wings, folding the entire camp into a warm, womb-like space. When the storm finally hit the plain, every sound became part of the great ordeal. The wind beat against the skin like a beast trying to break in, and the smoke vents began to flap like birds in a trap. And inside the teepee, no one sat idle. Those on duty watched the direction of the wind, and if it changed, they had to go outside, sometimes crawling so as not to fall, and rearrange the vents so that the smoke would not be driven back inside. The frame poles could bend and groan under the pressure, and they were supported from the inside, propped up or carefully lifted. Snow settled on the roof, accumulating in heavy layers. Then the inner walls were beaten with special long sticks, causing the snow cover to slide down. If you missed just a couple of hours, the weight of the snow could tear the skin or bend the poles until they cracked. The fire was kept to a minimum, just enough to keep from freezing. Firewood, the gold of winter, could not be wasted. Often, several families would gather in one teepee, warming each other with their bodies, breath, and presence. It was cramped and sometimes stuffy, but that was what brought them closer together. The fear of the storm disappeared when they could hear the breathing of their loved ones and the crackling of the small fire. If the covering was torn, repairs began immediately. Women who were the best at sewing deftly mended the tear, often right under the howling wind, holding the needle in hands that trembled from the cold. Sometimes the hole was temporarily plugged with a spare skin, pressed down with stakes or straps. If you delayed, the storm would tear the entire wall apart, turning the house into shreds. Dogs, faithful and courageous companions of humans, also found shelter. They crawled inside or hid in special low huts. Their warm bodies served as another source of heat, and their alert ears warned of every change in the wind. When the storm subsided, the silence seemed deafening, but there was only more work to be done. First, they dug out the exits. The snow could lie like a wall, sometimes even covering the tops of the teepees. Then they cleared the area around them, freed the smoke vents, and checked the knots and guy ropes. The camp spread its wings again, coming back to life. The ability to mobilize quickly, act without panic, and understand the dwelling as a living tool was the main secret to survival. The teepee was not just a home, it was a partner, a protection, a ship in the stormy winter sea. And every storm became a test of the interaction between man and nature, a test that they knew how to pass. Sometimes storms caught hunters or warriors far from their main camp, in the open steppe or forest. In such situations, the ability to quickly build a temporary shelter became a matter of life and death. One of the most effective methods was to build a snow cave or quincy. Hunters would rake up a large pile of snow, let it settle, and then dig out a cavity inside. The snow walls retained heat well, and even a single candle or body heat was enough to raise the temperature inside above zero. The entrance was made below floor level so that cold air would accumulate in the pit, and warm air would remain above, in the living area. A small hole was always made in the ceiling for ventilation. If there was not much snow, natural shelters were used. Fallen trees, upturned roots, ravines. A canopy was built from branches, covered with skins or fir branches, and then covered with snow. Snow was always used as insulation to cover all the cracks. Subarctic peoples, such as the Cree and Athabascans, knew how to build temporary shelters out of branches that resembled miniature wigwams. They covered them with skins, which they always carried with them on their sleds. Such a shelter could be erected in half an hour. An important element of survival was the so-called firebed. The ground was warmed by a large fire, then the coals were raked together, and the hot ground was covered with a layer of earth and spruce branches. A person sleeping on such a bed received heat from the ground throughout the night. This allowed them to sleep even without a warm shelter. They also used the technique of sleeping in a snow trench. They dug a narrow ditch, lined the bottom with branches, lay down inside, and covered themselves with skins. The snow walls protected them from the wind, and the narrow space quickly warmed up with body heat. The main thing was not to let the snow completely cover the sleeper. The ability to make a shelter out of nothing was a basic skill for every man. Training for this began at an early age. Playing games of building huts was practice for the real struggle for life. Temporary shelters were not comfortable, but they fulfilled their main purpose. They preserved life until the weather improved. It was a demonstration of extreme ingenuity and knowledge of physics. History knows many examples of lone hunters surviving multi-day blizzards in such snow dens. This required not only skill, but also tremendous psychological fortitude. A temporary shelter is the last line of defense, when only a thin wall of snow and branches stands between a person and death. We have seen that for indigenous peoples, protection from winter storms was not a struggle against nature, but an art of coexisting with it. Their dwellings, teepees, wigwams, earthen houses, were ingenious engineering structures that used the laws of aerodynamics and thermodynamics long before their scientific discovery. Snow became insulation, wind helped with ventilation, and the earth served as a heat accumulator. The experience of past generations teaches us that reliability does not always mean rigidity and massiveness. Flexibility, adaptability, and knowledge of the properties of materials are sometimes more important than thick walls. In extreme climates, it is not the strongest who survive, but the smartest and most observant. Which of these ancient building principles do you think can be applied in the modern world to create eco-friendly housing? Write your ideas in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into the history of survival technology.